The alien laughed at the gun. Not a small laugh, not a polite laugh. He laughed away. Someone laughs when they see a child holding a stick and calling it a sword. His name was Wren, and he was the ambassador of the Cathale Empire, and he had never lost a war, and he had never been afraid of anything. And right now he was standing in the great hall of Vethera Station, surrounded by 11 species from 11 different corners of the galaxy, and he was laughing at a human. The human holding the gun did not laugh back. Her name was Sergeant Elara Voss, and she was 34 years old, and she had sand-colored hair pulled tight behind her head, and a scar that ran from her left ear to her jaw, and she had been in 4 wars, and she had buried more friends than she could count, and she was standing very still holding her standard-issue pulse rifle in both hands, while the most powerful alien diplomat in the known galaxy made jokes about it. Wren reached out one long silver finger and tapped the side of the rifle. He said the magazine was small. He said the range was embarrassing. He said the recoil was like a child sneezing. Said all of this in perfect translated standard, so that every delegate in the room could understand every word. The room laughed with him. The Sarth delegates laughed their wet clicking laugh. The Maldine representatives made that high vibrating sound that meant amusement. Even the Yathani observer, who was supposed to be neutral, turned away to hide what was clearly a smile. Voss did not move. She stood with the rifle in her hands, and she looked at Wren, and she did not say one single word. The human diplomat beside her, a young man named Counselor Wren, shifted on his feet and opened his mouth, and she touched his arm once, and he closed it again. Wren was not finished. A walked to the display table in the center of the room, where the weapons of 12 species had been laid out for this summit, this great meeting of minds, this gathering that was supposed to build trust between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. He picked up his own weapon. It was beautiful, the way a lightning storm is beautiful, long and silver and humming with quiet power, with a magazine that held 300 plasma charges and a range of 4 kilometers, and a targeting system that could track 17 objects at once. He held it next to Voss's rifle, the way a man holds a diamond next to a river stone. He said something in Kethel, and the translator turned it into standard. A second later, he said that humanity had been spacefaring for 60 years and still built weapons like they were living in a cave. The room laughed again. Voss looked at the rifle in Wren's hands. She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the beautiful long magazine and the glowing barrel and the perfect, elegant weight of it. Then she looked at her own rifle. 28 rounds in the magazine, short barrel, simple iron sights with a basic digital overlay, heavy enough that you felt it in your shoulders. After a long march, no targeting system, no auto track, no smart ammunition, just a Guna, very simple, very ugly, very human gun. Wren leaned close to her and whispered that maybe she should say something, that maybe she should explain, that maybe she should defend the design. Voss said nothing. She just stood there holding her rifle with both hands and watching Wren perform for the room. And she thought about something. She thought about a place called Kara Valley. She thought about the rain that fell for 11 days straight and turned the ground into black soup. She thought about the bunker that collapsed on 3rd Squad, and how she and 2 others had to fight their way through 40 meters of enemy-held corridor with nothing but their rifles and their hands and their absolute refusal to die. She thought about how Corporal Denman had changed his magazine in the dark in that corridor in 1.8 seconds with 3 broken fingers and a piece of shrapnel in his shoulder. She thought about why the magazine was the size it was. She thought about why the gun was as heavy as it. Or she thought about every single design decision that Wren was laughing at, and she knew where each one came from. It came from a war. Every single one. The weight came from Moran Station, where the lightweight composite frames shattered under pressure and soldiers died holding broken guns. The short barrel came from the siege of New Dhaka, where long-barreled weapons got caught on doorframes and killed their owners. The iron sights came from a dozen engagements where smart targeting systems got scrambled by interference and left soldiers blind. The 28-round magazine came from a man named Colonel Ibarra, who survived the crossing of the Beth Corridor on exactly 28 rounds, and then spent 2 years redesigning the standard load, because he said that a soldier who needs more than that in a contained firefight is already dead anyway. Every single thing Vren was laughing at was paid for in human blood. Voss knew this the way she knew how to breathe. She did not say it. She stood still, and she let Vren finish his performance, and she watched the room laugh, and she filed every face away in her memory the way soldiers file away terrain. The summit continued. There were speeches about cooperation and speeches about shared futures and speeches about the great family of spacefaring civilizations coming together in peace. Vren gave a long speech about the superiority of Kethel defense philosophy, and the assembled delegates nodded. Voss stood at her post by the door with her rifle at her side. Vren found her during the break. He looked embarrassed on her behalf, which she found interesting because she was not embarrassed at all. He said he was sorry about Vrench, said she was asked her if it bothered her. She thought about it for a moment, the way she thought about everything carefully and without hurry. She said that Vren had never lost anyone. He asked what that meant. She said that people who have never lost anyone always think that bigger is better and more is stronger, and that winning is about having the most powerful weapon in the room. She said that people who have lost someone know that winning is about being the last one standing when everything goes wrong. Vren looked at her rifle. He asked her if she really believed that a 28-round magazine was enough. She looked at the door. She looked at the corridor beyond it and its tight walls and its low ceiling and the way the light flickered slightly at the far end. She said she had never needed more. Then the lights went out, not flickering, not dimming out, all of them at once across the entire station, like a hand closing over a flame. And in the darkness, Voss already had her rifle up. She was already moving. She was already counting 28 rounds. It would be enough. She already knew it would be enough, because she had been here before, not on this station, but in this dark, in this exact dark, and she was still alive. The emergency lights came on after 40 seconds. 40 seconds of total darkness in a station full of diplomats and soldiers and aliens who had never been in total darkness before and did not know what to do with it. 40 seconds of shouting in 6 languages and the crash of something expensive falling over and the high panicked vibration of the Moldine delegates who communicated fear through their skin. And right now their skin was very loud. Voss counted the 40 seconds in her head. Without thinking about it, it was something soldiers did. You counted because time mattered, and because when everything went wrong, the one thing you could always do was count. When the red emergency light filled the corridor, she had already moved Vren behind her and already identified 3 defensible positions and already done the math on sightlines and entry points. Vren was breathing fast. He was 26 years old and had spent his career in conference rooms, and he was discovering something that soldiers learn early, which is that your body does not care about your credentials when it gets scared. Asked her in a very quiet voice what was happening. She said she did not know yet. Asked if she thought it was an attack. She said she thought it was something. He asked what he should do. She pointed to the corner behind the heavy display table and said to get there and stay down and not to stand up for any reason until she said so. And he nodded and went, and she noted that he went quickly and without arguing, which was good. She liked people who moved fast and argued. Later she got on the cum. Cum gave her static, and then a voice, and then static again. She caught 3 words from the station security channel: breach and corridor. And south. She looked at the south corridor. It was 80 meters long and 2 meters wide and had 6 doors on each side and 1 sharp turn at the far end, and the emergency lighting left the last 30 meters in shadow. She thought about the Kethal weapon Vren had been holding 4 hours ago. 300 plasma charges, 4-kilometer range, 17 target tracking system. She thought about what that weapon would do in this corridor. She thought about the size of it. It was nearly as long as the corridor was wide. She thought about the tracking system and how it would process 17 targets in a space where targets appeared and disappeared behind doors in fractions of a second. She thought about the plasma charge and what it would do to the walls and the ceiling and the human sheltering behind the display table if it had missed them. She thought about her rifle short barrel, simple sights, 28 rounds. She felt something settle in her chest the way it always settled when the math worked out. Ren called to her from behind the table in a whisper. He asked her about the rifle he had been thinking about. Ren's speech, and he said he knew this was a very bad time, but he needed to understand something. He asked her why. Just why? Why? Was the magazine only 28 rounds when the Kethel carried 300? Why? Was the range so short when the Kethel could hit a target 4 kilometers away? Why? Was the gun so heavy and so simple when every other species in the galaxy had moved past this kind of design centuries ago? She did not take her eyes off the South Corridor, but she talked, because talking cost nothing, and because Ren deserved to know, and because what she was about to tell him was the most important thing she had ever learned, and she had learned it the hard way. She told him about Maran Station first. She told him about the first human-manufactured composite rifles that were light as air and beautiful and fell apart under sustained fire because the people who designed them had never been in sustained fire and had built them for the wars they imagined instead of the wars that actually happened. She told him about the soldiers who died holding guns that had cracked down the frame. She told him how after Maran Station the military went back and made the gun heavier and uglier and harder to carry, and how every soldier who carried it hated the weight for exactly as long as it took them to be in their first real fight, and then they never complained about the weight again. She told him about New Dakashi, told him about street fighting in a city that had been bombed flat and then burned and then bombed again until the streets were canyons of rubble and every corridor was a killing ground 3 meters wide. She told him about the long-barreled rifles that caught on collapsed doorways and overturned vehicles and tight corners, and how soldiers died in those doorways because they could not bring their weapon to bear fast enough. She told him how the barrel got shorter after New Daka. She told him about the targeting system. She told him about the Battle of Veth Corridor, where electromagnetic interference from a cracked reactor core scrambled every smart system on the field and left 200 soldiers shooting blind because they had trusted their weapons to think for them, and their weapons had stopped thinking. She told him how after Veth Corridor, they stripped the smart systems down to the absolute minimum and put iron sights back on, and how the soldiers who lived through that battle slept better, knowing that the thing in their hands would work, even if everything else stopped working. Then she told him about Colonel Ibarra. She told him about a man who was not famous and not celebrated and not remembered by anyone outside the military, but who had walked out of the worst corridor fight in human history on 28 rounds. She told him how Ibarra spent 2 years after that fight looking at the data from every contained engagement in human military history and finding the number, real number, not the number you wanted, not the number that sounded impressive, the number that was actually enough, the number that kept soldiers alive without giving them so much weight that they slowed down, or so much firepower that they stopped being careful when Adrian was quiet for a moment. He said that was a very small number. She said yes. He said that Vren had 300. She said she knew. He asked what the difference was. She told him the difference was that Vren had never had to be careful. She told him that when you carry 300 rounds, you do not learn to make each one count because you do not have to. She told him that when you carry 28 rounds, you are very, very careful about every single one. She told him that careful soldiers came home then. She heard something. It was not loud. It was the soft sound of a door at the far end of the South Corridor opening. In a way that was not normal, she stopped talking. She brought the rifle up. She looked down the sights at the shadow at the far end of the corridor. She breathed out slow. She thought about Maran Station and New Dhaka and Veth Corridor and Colonel Ibarra. And all the dead and all the lessons and all the weight in the gun in her hands. She thought about everything that had been paid for this rifle to be exactly what it was. Then the shadow moved and Elara Voss went to work. There were 9 of them. That was the first thing Voss counted, 9. Shapes moving through the far shadow of the south corridor in tactical spread the way trained soldiers move, not civilians. Not rioters, but soldiers who had practiced this entry, who had walked this approach before in their heads, or in simulation, or in real blood. She clocked them in less than a second height mass. Weapon type spacing between them, the way the lead figure moved slightly ahead of the others, which meant he was the one making decisions, which meant he was the one she needed to watch first. She did not fire yet. You never fired yet. You breathed and you counted and you waited for the moment that gave you the most and cost you the least. She keyed her cum with her thumb. Without looking at it, she said, 9 hostiles, south corridor closing fast, requesting immediate backup. Cum gave her half a word, and then static, no backup. She already knew there would be no backup. The breach had cut Cum's, which meant it was planned, which meant someone had spent real time preparing this, which meant the people coming down the corridor toward her were not desperate or angry or improvising. They were professionals that made it harder, and also in a strange way simpler professionals. Moved in patterns could be read. She identified the bottleneck. It was the sharp turn at the 40-meter mark where the corridor bent left, and the emergency lighting created a bright band of red on the right wall and a deep shadow on the left. Anyone coming through that turn from the south had to pass through the bright band. For approximately 1.5 seconds, they would be fully lit. 1.5 seconds was a very long time. She heard something behind her. She glanced back without moving the rifle. 3 more of the alien delegates had come out of the conference room into her corridor. There was Vreni was standing at the door of the conference room in his long silver diplomatic coat, holding nothing because his weapon had been checked at the station entrance per summit protocol, and he was looking down the corridor at the shapes coming through the shadow with an expression she had never seen on a Kethel face before. She had seen confidence. She had seen contempt. She had seen the polished, unreadable calm that powerful aliens wore the way they wore their clothes. She had not seen this. She had not seen fear. She pointed at the floor behind the corridor's structural pillar, and she said one word. Almgren did not move. For a moment, she said it again. Down he went down. She turned back to the corridor. Lead figure had reached the 40-meter mark. The bright band of red light caught him across the chest. She fired once. The Bayfrieda had reached the 40-meter mark. The bright band of red light caught him across the chest. She fired once. The Vade figure had reached the 40-meter mark. Lead figure stopped being a problem. The 8 behind him scattered exactly the way she knew. They would scatter because professionals respond to contact the same way every time. They've been trained to respond, and training makes you fast, but it also makes you predictable. She was already moving. Left along the wall, she fired twice more into the right side of the corridor, where 2 of the scattered figures had taken cover behind a service conduit that gave them the illusion of protection, but not the actual thing. 2 more figures stopped being a problem. 5 left. She reached the first door on the left side of the corridor and pushed through it into a supply room with a second exit that she had mapped from the station schematic. She had studied for exactly this reason when she arrived yesterday, because Voss always studied the schematic and she always found the second exits. She came out of the second exit 8 meters further down the corridor behind 3 of the remaining 5. What followed took 11 seconds. She knew it was 11 seconds because she counted when it was over. 5 figures were down in the corridor, and the remaining 4 had pulled back around the far corner, and she was pressed against the wall with her back to the cool metal and her rifle at her chest. And 7 rounds left in the magazine. 7 rounds and 4 targets. The math was tight. but it was not impossible. She heard something from the far end of the corridor, not movement, sound she recognized. It was the sound of a Cathal plasma weapon charging Vren's. Weapon had been checked at the entrance, but these were Cathal soldiers, and Cathal soldiers would have brought their own weapons inside the station in pieces and assembled them in whatever room they had been given, and now one of them had the weapon assembled and charged, and was about to do something very stupid. She knew it was stupid because she could see what the plasma weapon would do to this corridor. The walls were a titanium ceramic composite, rated against standard ballistic rounds, but not against directed plasma at close range. A plasma shot in this corridor would blow through the wall on the left into the power junction. She had also noted from the schematic, and the power junction would arc, and the fire suppression would kick in, and the corridor would fill with suppression foam in approximately 4 seconds, and she and everyone else in it would be combat ineffective, and the 4 remaining soldiers would walk through and complete their objective, which was almost certainly the delegates in the conference room. She had 4 seconds to fix this. She moved not slowly, not carefully, not with the measured patience of the last 2 minutes. She moved the way soldiers move when time is the only thing that matters. She came around the corner fast and low. The Cathal soldier with the plasma weapon was tall and had the weapon half raised, and he was fast. Was very fast, but he was aiming at a target that was standing, and she was not standing. She was already below his aim point when he fired. The plasma charge hit the wall above her head. She felt the heat across her shoulders. She fired twice at point-blank range, and the Cathal soldier fell. 3 left. They were close now, and in this corridor close meant her gun and not their guns. Their weapons were long. The corridor was 2 meters wide. She had trained in corridors 2 meters wide for 15 years. She fought for 48 more seconds. She used 5 more rounds. When it was over, she stood in the red emergency light in the south corridor of Vethara station, with 2 rounds left in her magazine and 8 bodies on the floor around her, and a burn across her shoulder blades from the plasma shot, and blood on her hands that was not all hers. She stood there, and she breathed. She checked her rounds 2 left. She looked down the corridor. It was clear. She looked backward, was at the corner with his mouth open. 3 delegates were behind the pillar with their arms over their heads, and Vren was on his feet. He was standing in the corridor looking at her, and looking at the 8 figures on the ground, and looking at the gun in her hands. His expression was something she had no word for. She had never seen it before on any face. She walked back down the corridor toward him. She ejected the magazine. She caught it in her hand. She held it out to him. She said nothing. He looked at the empty magazine. He looked at her face. She walked past him to the conference room door and checked the room, and then she stood at her post with her last magazine loaded and her rifle at her side, and she waited, because the fight might not be over, and because there was nothing else to say. Not yet. The backup came 19 minutes later. Not human backup. Station's own security force, a mix of Sorath and Yathani officers, who moved through the corridors in full armor with their weapons up and their lights sweeping the walls, and who found Elara Voss standing at the conference room door with her rifle at her side and 8 bodies behind her in the south corridor and 2 rounds in her magazine. The senior Sorath officer looked at the bodies. He looked at her. He counted the bodies. He counted them again. He said something in Sorath, and the translator said it in Standard. He said how she said she had done her job. He said there were 8 of them. She said she knew. He said they were Cathal Special Forces. The words landed differently than he expected them to. He'd said it the way you say something that explains everything. A Cathal Special Forces were not something one human sergeant with a standard rifle was supposed to survive. She had not told him she was supposed to survive. She had just survived. He stood looking at her for a long moment, and then he went to secure the corridor and left her alone at the door. The delegates came out of the conference room one by one in the hour that followed. Some of them looked at the corridor, and looked away fast. Some of them stopped and stood very still and looked at the bodies. The way you look at something that has rearranged your understanding of the world. The Maldine delegate walked past without looking at anything, which was how the Maldine handled things they did not want to process. Ren came out and stood next to her, and he did not say anything for a long time, and she appreciated that about him. Was learning then Vren came out. He was not walking the way he had walked. Before he had walked like a man who owned every room he entered, which was probably something Kethel learned young and practiced until it was as natural as breathing. Now he walked like a man who was thinking very hard about something that had damaged a belief he did not know he had. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her. He looked at the corridor. He looked at her rifle. He said he wanted to understand. She waited. He said he had trained Kettle Special Forces. He said he had watched them train. He said he knew what 8 Keth Special Forces could do and what it took to stop them, and that what she had done in that corridor was not something he had a framework for. She said nothing. He asked her how many rounds she had used. She said 26 was quiet. He said his weapon held 300. She said she knew. He said she had killed 8 of his people with 26 rounds in a dark corridor with a gun. He had laughed at this morning. She said yes to her how, not how in the tactical sense. She could see he was not asking about the mechanics. Was asking about something deeper. The way people ask about something when they realize the thing they thought they understood is not the thing at all. She thought about how to answer. She thought about Moran Station and New Dhaka and Colonel Ibarra and all the dead friends and all the dark corridors and all the weight of a gun that was built not for the wars you imagined, but for the ones that actually came. She said the first thing that mattered was the corridor. She said a 2-meter wide corridor was not a battlefield. She said his weapon was a battlefield weapon, 300 rounds for open engagements, where you had range and sight lines and time to acquire targets. She said his weapon was designed for wars that gave you space. She said human wars almost never gave you space. She said human wars happened in cities and bunkers and collapsed buildings and crawl spaces and corridors, exactly like this one, and so human weapons were designed for exactly this. Short barrel to move in tight spaces, iron sights that worked in smoke and interference and darkness. Enough rounds to finish a contained fight and not one round more, because every round you carry is weight, and weight slows you down, and slow gets you killed. He was listening in a way she had not seen him listen before. Every piece of arrogance was gone. Just a face listening. He asked about the reload. He had seen the reload in the darkness of the corridor in the seconds when everything was moving, and she had dropped the empty and seated the fresh magazine and been back on target before he had even processed that she had stopped firing. He said it was less than 2 seconds. She said 1.9. He said that seemed impossible. She said she had done it 10,000 times. He said 10,000. She said in training and in darkness and in rain and underwater and with her hands shaking and with 3 broken fingers, which was not her story, but Corporal Demon's story, and Demon was dead now, but the technique he had used to reload with 3 broken fingers had been standardized and was now taught to every human soldier, because that was what humans did with the things they learned. That was the part that stopped him. He said what? She said that was what humans did. She said when a human soldier survived something by doing something new, they studied it, and they wrote it down, and they taught it to everyone else, so that the next soldier who faced the same problem did not have to invent the solution in the dark while bleeding. She said Cathal Special Forces were exceptional individuals. She said human soldiers were a system. She said you could kill an exceptional individual. She said killing a system was much harder. He stood very still. She looked at the corridor. She looked at the 26 figures of spent cartridge casings on the floor, catching the red emergency light. She thought about something she had never said out loud before. She said that humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. She said they were not the fastest, or the most intelligent, or the most technologically advanced. She said that for most of their history, they had been the weakest things in any room they entered. Animals stronger than them, weather more powerful than them, disease more patient than the mother, humans more numerous or better armed or holding higher ground. She said that humans had spent 10,000 years being outmatched. She said that was the thing that Vren did not understand when he looked at the rifle. She said the rifle was not impressive. She said the rifle was a monument to every single time a human looked at something bigger and stronger and better armed than them, and said not today, and meant it. She said the 28-round magazine was not a limitation. She said it was a promise that whoever carried this gun had been trained well enough and was careful enough and was paying enough attention that 28 rounds was all they needed. Vren looked at the magazine on the floor where she had left it empty, spent, ordinary, looking a small gray rectangle that had cost someone a morning of mockery and then kept 11 people alive in a dark corridor. He said nothing for a long time. Then he bent down. He picked up the empty magazine. He held it in both hands, the way you hold something you are trying to understand with your hands, because your mind is not enough. He looked at her. He said he owed her an apology. She said the apology could wait. She said the corridor might not be fully clear. She said he should go back inside and stay down until the security sweep was finished. He went. She turned back to her post. She stood in the red light with her rifle in both hands and her eyes on the corridor and 2 rounds left in the magazine and the smell of burnt air and plasma discharge still sitting in her throat. She breathed in, she breathed out, she counted. She was still counting when the next security team came through and gave her the all clear, and she finally let her shoulders drop for the first time in 19 minutes. She had not noticed them rising. She never did. 3 days later, the summit resumed. Nobody had suggested canceling it. That surprised some people. It did not surprise Voss. People who had almost died together in the same dark corridor tended to want to finish what they had started. She stood at the same post by the same door in the same great hall of Vethara Station and watched the delegates take their seats again around the great curved table, and thought that the room looked different now. Not different in any way she could point at. The chairs were the same, and the table was the same, and the light was back to normal white instead of emergency red, but the delegates sat differently. They sat the way people sit when they have been reminded that the universe is not as safe as the room they are sitting in. Even the Maldine had stopped making their amused, vibrating sounds. The Sarth delegates kept glancing at the south corridor entrance. Ren sat at the human table and looked more like a diplomat than he had 3 days ago, which was interesting because 3 days ago he had been very confident and very polished and very much at ease. Now he looked like a man who had stopped performing confidence and started actually having it, which was different and better. She noted that he sat facing the door. He had not done that before Vren came in last. He was alone. He had sent his staff ahead and come alone, and he walked to the human table and stopped in front of Voss, and she straightened and waited. He put something on the small ledge beside her post. She looked at it. It was the empty magazine. She had not seen it since she left it on the corridor floor 3 days ago. He said he had asked the security team if he could keep. I said they had let him. She said nothing. He said he had been thinking for 3 days about what she told him. He said he had been thinking about systems and about monuments and about the difference between weapons designed for wars you imagined and weapons designed for wars that actually came. Said he had served in 4 campaigns. He said the Kethal had won all 4. He said he had always believed that winning proved that his approach was correct. She said she understood that. He said he was starting to understand that winning 4 campaigns against opponents who were weaker or less prepared was not the same thing as being tested. He said that what happened in the South Corridor was a test, not of her. He said she was clearly not the one being tested. He said the corridor was a test of philosophy. His philosophy and hers. He said his philosophy had failed, not because his special forces were not skilled. He said they were exceptional. He said they failed because they were designed for a different kind of war. He said she was right that the corridor was not a battlefield and that his weapons were battlefield weapons and that he had never in 40 years of military service stopped to ask himself what happened when the battlefield did not cooperate. She said that the battlefield almost never cooperated. He said he was beginning to understand that. She looked at the empty magazine on the ledge. She picked it up. She turned it over in her hand. She thought about Corporal Denman reloading with 3 broken fingers in the dark. She thought about Colonel Ibarra walking out of a corridor on 28 rounds and then spending 2 years making that number official. She thought about all the humans who had died getting to the point where a weapon like this could exist and do what it did. In a corridor on a space station 60 light years from Earth, she said something that she had not planned to say. She said that she was sorry about his people. He looked at her. He said they had tried to kill her. She said she knew. He said that most soldiers did not apologize for killing enemies. She said she was not apologizing for the killing. She said she was sorry that they were sent into a corridor to do a job that the corridor was going to make impossible, and that whoever sent them there either did not know or did not care about the difference. She said that a soldier deserved to be sent into a fight. They have a real chance of winning. She said that was not something she could have told them before the fight, but she could think it after Vran was quiet for a long moment. He said that was a very human thing to say. She said she had heard that before. He said it was not an insult. He said he thought he had been using the word human as an insult his whole life without noticing. He said he had meant it to mean limited and small and behind. He said he was no longer sure it meant any of those things. She looked at the magazine in her hand. She set it back on the ledge. She said she was going to tell him one more thing, and then she had to go back to watching the door. He waited. She said that the Kethel were powerful. She said they were genuinely powerful, and that she was not trying to take that from them. She said that power was a real thing, and that it mattered. She said, but she said that the thing that kept humans alive for 10,000 years on a planet that was trying to kill them before they ever got to space was not power. She said it was the willingness to look at the thing that almost killed you and learn everything it had to teach and then get up and go back. She said that humans had lost so many times that losing had stopped feeling like an ending. She said it felt like school. She said every battle they lost and every war they survived and every weapon design that failed and got rebuilt and every technique that came from a soldier who did something desperate in the dark and lived, all of it was school. She said the galaxy was going to learn that about humans eventually. She said she hoped it would not cost too much to learn it. She said she hoped this was a start. She stepped back to her post. She put her eyes on the door. Vren went to his seat. The summit began again. Ren gave the opening statement for the human delegation, and he was good, better than he had been before. He spoke about cooperation, not as a favor that the older species were doing for humanity, but as a mutual thing, a two-direction thing, a thing that required everyone to bring something real to the table. He spoke about the fact that humans had something to offer, not in spite of what they were because of it, because they were small and they were young and they had lost more times than they had won, and they had gotten up every single time because they built weapons for the wars that actually came, because 28 rounds was not a limitation. It was a promise. Voss listened to him from the door. She was watching the room, but she heard every word. She thought he had understood. She thought about all the dead who had paid for the lessons that were in that speech without knowing they were paying for a speech. She thought about Denman. She thought about Ibarra. She thought about all the names on all the walls back on Earth and all the stations in between. She thought about the empty magazine on the ledge beside her. She looked at it one more time. 28 rounds. Not 300. Not enough to be arrogant. Just enough. Always. Just enough. She faced the door. She breathed. She counted. and in the great hall of Veth stationed 60 light years. From the pale blue world that had made her, the galaxy began very slowly to understand what humans actually were. Not a joke, not a footnote, not a primitive species with a small magazine and a short barrel and a gun that a powerful ambassador had laughed at one morning and never laughed at again. They were the thing that got back up. They had always been the thing that got back up. They would always be the thing that got back up. And somewhere in the quiet hum of a space station surrounded by stars, the empty magazine caught the light and held it like a monument, like a promise, like 28 reasons why you should never ever count the humans out.